thank you so much for allowing us to be here today tonight, study your word and be with Darrell as we learn from him and from your word. Thank you for the blessings you give us always. In Jesus' name I pray.
Amen. Okay. As we get going tonight, we have to remember that all this Revelation study began when we went into the interpretation of Daniel's vision in chapter 7. Because that interpretation, that vision, directly had to do with what John is teaching in Revelation 13 and 14. They're mirror images. So this is what we have embarked upon, and we got started in Revelation 13, and so we want to continue that. We left off at verse 3, and so really just got a beginning in that particular chapter of Revelation. So tonight we'll continue that, but keep in mind, and it's probably, well, it would be helpful if you have a mind to do so, to refresh your memory with regard to Daniel 7, 15, and following, and the interpretation of the vision. So we'll talk a little bit about the relationship between the two as we go along tonight. But we will be in Revelation 13. And as a reflection of Daniel 7 and the interpretation. So we have not left Daniel, but in what we are doing is looking back in time in Revelation as Daniel looked forward in time in the book of Daniel. And so we'll bring up these relationships as we go along. So with that little preamble, Revelation 3 in the message to Sardis will not work at this time. Okay. So it started out, the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. Then I saw a beast coming out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on its horns were 10 diadems, and on its heads were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. Okay, so in verse 3, I saw one of the heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed, and the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. Now, what we had just started to talk about was this idea of this head having been slain, that it had a fatal wound. It appeared to be dead. And then we asked the question, how can a fatal wound be healed? We're talking about the Roman Empire, things having to do with Rome, and we want to answer this question. So we have a monster that's representing Rome and controlled by Satan. They have the same number of heads and the same number of horns to demonstrate their closeness. So both of these beasts. So this beast is slain and yet healed. So when we talk about the beast, we're talking about Rome. And so seems to be slain. Well, there are a couple of possibilities here that we'll talk about. So this is our title slide that tells us what we're doing. And I'm going to catch up with my own program here. Okay. So real quickly, This is what I was alluding to when I said we talk a little bit about the relationships here between Daniel 7 and Revelation 13 and 14. John uses Daniel as a basis for the theme of Revelation. These are points that we've made, but we're just very brief review. They blend together in a beautiful unity of Revelation. So we put both of them together. It's a great unity. Revelation 13, 9, and 10 is where he talks about the perseverance and faith of the saints. So we're going to get to that in more detail. But the saints are going to have patience and faith. And have you ever talked about the book of Revelation as a book of encouragement for Christians to hang on through persecution? Absolutely. So the point of Revelation 13 is going to be just that. Okay, and again, we'll get into that in more detail. The fact that John talks about these animals, leopard, bear, lion, and that they are coming up out of the sea, like in Daniel 7, puts us in the context of Daniel 7. And the main thrust of Daniel, the coming of the 4 successive nations before the coming of the Messiah, who will set up an eternal, everlasting kingdom. So this is generally where we're at here, okay? And so Revelation 3 and 4a, I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain. We just read that. And so we're asking the question, how can it be if it looked like the Roman Empire had come to an end, this fatal wound, but then it wasn't? So there's a couple of possibilities that we'll talk about here, okay? So one possibility is to realize that in the beginning, Rome was a republic, okay, not an empire. And the empire part has to do with Julius, one of the commanders who was a governor in the area of Gaul, who brought an army, crossed the Rubicon. We all heard about that stream of northern Italy crossed the Rubicon. It was unlawful to lead an army into Rome. And he knew it was. And so he did that anyway, and a civil war broke out. And in the course of things, he's going to die. And then, about 5 years later, Julius was killed. And then eventually his adopted son, Augustus, is going to take over. And it's going to go from being a republic, but through this intrigue and this piece of history, it's going to become an empire. Okay, all right. But at first, it was a republic, and so the Roman Republic had stood for centuries until Julius Caesar, who I just mentioned, and his crossing the Rubicon, considered to be an act of war and all that went on. So Julius didn't want to be one of several rulers. He wanted to be the ruler. Okay, Rome didn't want him to be emperor because he was very popular and powerful, and they had some other ideas, but he wasn't. So he subjugated the Roman Republic and made it into an empire. So that's what happened there. So when he did cross that Rubicon, 49 BC, considered an act of war, killed by the Roman Senate a few years later, because they had lost their power to Julius. Okay, so they thought that they had killed the empire, and the idea of an empire. But 13 or 14 years later, Octavian, or known as August, revived the empire. So what they thought they had killed, they had not killed. The beast rose again, the fatal wound was healed, and the empire marched on. That's one scenario. I think that the second one is more to my liking. So what, Daryl? So the second possibility refers to the effect, the devastating effect that Nero had upon the empire. So the Caesars that followed the Flavian family. So the Flavian dynasty ruled the Roman Empire between AD 69 and 96, encompassing the reigns of Vespasian, his two sons, Titus and Domitian. So that's the Flavian family. Okay, so the Caesars that followed them healed these to some extent. Vespasian brought back some of the unity and sensibility that existed before Caligula and Nero. Perhaps not a specific king, but a concept of weakening effects brought about. Nero weakened the empire, but Domitian strengthened it by indoctrinating the people with Caesar worship, which is going to be a big part of all this. It's going to be a big part of the persecution that Christians will suffer. And so I rather lean toward this explanation. Something was needed to bind the provinces together, to unify the people, and so this idea of emperor worship, which is quite an interesting story, comes in. So if this second one is true, then what healed the empire, the sea beast used against the church. So if it's emperor worship to heal the empire, then that's exactly what's going to be used against Christians who would not submit to worshiping the emperor. Okay, so that'll be a big part of things. So in Revelation 13 and verse 4, here, Revelation 13:4. So let's look at 3 again. I saw one of the heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed, and the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. Okay. They worshipped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who is able to wage war with him?" Okay. So the dragon is Satan. Okay. And let me see if this is verse 4 that I have. Yeah, up here. So little writing there, probably bigger for you. Yeah. I got did some PowerPoint this time, so just had a little fun there. Okay. And so the dragon is Satan, and we're told here that they worshipped the dragon. They worshipped Satan because he gave his authority to the beast. So if you worship the emperor, if you worship Rome, then you are, in a sense, worshiping Satan because he gave his power to Rome. So they were working on his behalf. He was the one orchestrating the things that were going on. So I'm sure, absolutely 100% positive, that I talked a little bit about Satan's activity in attempting to keep the church from coming into being. And so we went back to Herod, and the children being killed, and the persecution of the Christians there in the book of Acts, and he couldn't stomp it out. And when he couldn't keep, of course, Jesus' death, okay, his crucifixion, and then the persecution, the church spread, and when he couldn't keep the church from coming into existence in that way, now he's using the Roman government to destroy the church. Okay. And so Satan is the dragon. So you think about in John 8:44 and 45, where Jesus told those Jews who were opposing him that you are of your father, the devil. Okay. So why did he say that? What's the point in saying the devil is your father? What does that mean? What made him their father? Okay. Oh yes. Yeah, Kevin.
you do the will of your Father.
Yeah, you do the will. You reflect his character. Yeah, you act like it. In fact, Jesus said, same thing. And Jesus said, and you want to do the will of your Father. Okay. All right. And so the people were not paying divine honors to Satan, bowing down, worshiping Satan in that sense, but they were giving respect. As they gave respect and deference and honor to Rome, then they were in that sense worshiping the dragon. Yeah, Chris?
Figure out the timeline here, because you've got a couple of options down here. When do you think emperor worship started?
Okay.
Because historically, I think it was like 44 BC. That's when Julius Caesar, that's when emperor worship started.
I would agree with that.
And
yeah.
so if it started in 44 BC, I'm just trying to get a timeline. If Nero was the weakening, and then it strengthened sort of after the destruction of Jerusalem and post that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then the worship of the beast, the dragon through the beast would have happened after that. So that later timeline is kind of a struggle for me, because I don't know how that, and I could just be missing something. I'm just trying to get the sequence of things.
Well, let me read you this little excerpt in my notes here that I didn't read. Let's see if we can make sense with this.
Okay.
Okay, so it's under the point, if the second one is true, so if it's emperor worship that healed, okay, I have it in parentheses, this argues for a late date for the writing of Revelation. Enough time had to pass for Nero or something like Nero to have happened to the Roman Empire, and then the period of the Flavian Caesars healing that and prolonging the life of the empire.
So that, and I think I buy in a little bit more in terms of the late date.
Yeah, the late date, early date is really fun because, you know, there's things on, yeah, okay.
I was gonna say, I think like, yeah, the imperial cult was like kind of established early on in the empire, but it had fallen out of popularity. There's like a famous quote, I think it's Vespasian, and I think that's when it kind of, part of where it fell out of popularity. I think it's Vespasian, when he died, he's attributed as saying, I think I'm becoming a god, kind of satirically, because it's so ridiculous. And so that the imperial cult, which was the emperor worship, had was not as popular as it had once been. And then once Nero had died, when Domitian came into power, he reinforced that imperial cult and brought it back into popularity, and he deified his brother Titus. And if I can't remember for sure, I don't exactly remember where, but I know Titus was sent to invade Judea.
Yeah.
And that was part of it, which also fits with this as being part of the beast. Because as we read on the next several verses, he talks about those who will be taken into captured and those who will be killed with the sword and the sling. So I think in that regard, it still makes sense that Domitian comes in, reestablishes the imperial cult even stronger than it was before.
Yeah.
Makes his brother a god. His brother invades Judea.
Well, and that also then plays into, because this idea that it's written for Christians that they may endure, right? This idea that they're doing that if it was worship in the 44 BC time frame, that's a long time ago. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're not, I mean, we're 50, 60, 70 years, and it's a long time, and the Jews particularly were not necessarily steeped in Roman history. That was not
Right.
how their operation went, but a significant trigger post Nero, where they thought, okay, things are actually coming down. And so if you're a Christian, the 70 AD comes true, you think things are breaking down, but then it doesn't.
Yeah.
So that would make sense too.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We're going to.
Sure.
Oh yes.
Just
Yes.
real quick.
Yes, yes, Ken.
Are you gonna discuss this section from, like, I know we're discussing it now as the immediate application to Christians at the time of John.
Yes.
Are we gonna discuss it from a kind of zoomed out perspective, bigger picture? I have a comment regarding that, so if you want me to save that, I will hold off.
I'd like to hear it.
We can save it for later.
All right.
Because I don't want to get
Well,
sidetracked too much.
My brain is looking for evidence that we are doing that, because I hadn't thought of that specifically, but maybe we will. Let's see. Hold on. And okay. Well, I want to so regarding Revelation 13:5, it was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given to him. So that's Daniel's time and half a time, or the 1260 days. That's that period. Okay, so we'll bring that in. But here's what I want to do. This is a hint of what's coming. So I'm going to say verse 5 is alluding to Nero, but I'm going to also present the idea that it may be actually talking about Domitian, who is going to carry on Nero's persecution. So we'll look at that here in just a few minutes. So I put that in my notes so that I would remember it, and we're going to get to that. Okay, so Domitian is definitely going to resume Nero's persecution. So if that's a resuming of the demand for emperor worship and those things that are involved in the persecution, then certainly we'll see that. So we'll work our way to that here. So for right now, we're talking about Nero. In verse 6, and he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. So the tabernacle here of God in verse 6 is, as he says, those who dwell in heaven. Okay. And this beast, which is Rome, with Satan's throne and power, he gives his power to the beast, is blaspheming God and those who dwell in heaven, those people who are in fellowship with God. Because there's going to be the contrast in Revelation of those who dwell in heaven and those who dwell on the earth. Okay, those two contrasted. So it's Christians versus unfaithful Jews who did not accept Christ and who are distinguished, you got to kind of follow me here, who are distinguished from the sea or the water. In Revelation 17:15, the water, the sea, is associated with the Gentiles. Okay? And so you have unfaithful Jews, and you have those who dwell in heaven who are in fellowship with God. Okay? Okay, so this mouth, that we're going to say is Nero for the moment, is Nero, who was emperor at the time that this book was written. So he persecuted the Jews, Christians, and Jews in general. Okay? So Nero represented a power, a political power, in opposition to Christ. So to whom belongs the power of ruling over the world? Who really has that power? Okay. Christ does. Okay. But Satan is causing this political power to compete with Christ. And the goal of the competition is to get all the peoples and nations to serve him, the beast, while trying to destroy those who are submissive to Christ. Kevin.
Just to add on to that, like with, to me, the idea of blasphemy here, and this works with the Jews who were religiously or culturally Jewish, but who denying Christ. That is what blasphemy is.
Mm-hmm.
And then also this idea of saying, no, it's Rome, it's the empire that's in charge of ruling the world, not Christ. That's also blasphemy. You're
Sure.
detracting from that is what Christ does. Or saying something like, well, it's not, Christ isn't the Son of God. That's blasphemy. And it's being highlighted here because that was another like red flag to me was the illustration of the beast that's injured, and then it comes back. Well, what does that remind us of? Well, that's what Jesus did.
Yeah.
So there's this battle, a spiritual battle that's going on of the beast saying, well, I'm doing everything Christ is doing.
Mm-hmm.
Is that really, that's blasphemous in and of itself.
Yeah.
That you're, it's a direct challenge to Christ's authority.
Mm.
And I see that happening here, and it made me think of, going all the way back to Genesis 3, the serpent will bruise his heel, but he will crush its head. Now Satan's trying to have the beast do the same thing. And then you see,
Yes.
like in Egypt, one of the first empires that we're presented with, God has all these miracles that he does with the plagues, and they try to do the same thing. It's like, well, we have our own powerful sorcerers, and we're going to mimic what God's doing and say, it's not really from God, it's from something else. It's by our own power.
Yes.
And that's what empire does is, well, all of this isn't really from God, it's from us.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what I think is like really being hit home here is like, they're going to try to make you think that this is where the true authority is and this is where God is. And it's not. That's blasphemy.
Yeah.
Well, we use empire, and it's really a battle of kingdoms, right? I mean, that's the reason the term empire, but it's in a like for like, it's a battle of kingdoms.
Yeah. Self-preservation, Yeah, good stuff, guys, really good. So we have the, might have had one out of order there. Nearly everything in Revelation 13 thus far is an exact copy of Daniel 7. Okay? In Daniel 2 and 7, he's looking at history to come. John is looking back over history that has already occurred. It just keeps us in that perspective. That's what's going on here, okay? Let me see what that slide said up here. I had a passage there, 13, 5 and 6, 5 and 6, 5 and 6, okay. Anyway, yeah, I'm just having fun with the PowerPoint there, so, don't pay me no mind, okay. Okay, verse 7 is also given him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. Okay. And all who dwell on the earth will worship him. Okay, so those are people that are not in fellowship with God. Everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. Okay. So we know that the Roman Empire, led by Nero, made war with the saints. And so Daniel talked about them, making war with the saints and overcoming them, right? And so those who dwell on the earth, again, refers to non-believers, Jews who did not accept Christ. Okay. All right. Now, verse 8 by the way, can you see why it's sometimes used by Calvinists in the effort to set forth the idea that God has a list of saved, a fixed list of saved, specific people that he's already determined would be saved, and that you cannot add to that list or diminish from that list. It is fixed, period. And sometimes they use this passage because he says that will worship him, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. Okay. So how might we approach this particular argument? Okay. Because it sounds like what it says there. Okay. If I'm looking at it from that Calvinistic point of view, might seem pretty plain. But when we're talking about that subject, we go to Ephesians 1 and look at what Paul said about God's eternal purpose, his plan that was in his mind from all eternity, Paul said. And so what does he say about the saved? Okay. He says that God chose us in him from the foundation of the world that we should be holy and blameless. So that sounds exactly like that, like what see, I did that and I forgot what I was saying. No. It sounds exactly like what John says here in Revelation. So the written from the foundation of the world in the Lamb's book of life. So what is he getting at here, Kevin?
I was just going to add to that. We've already kind of I feel like we've already been given a hint a little bit, because earlier in Revelation we're told about being sung in heaven a new song that's of Moses and the Lamb.
Uh-huh.
The Song of Moses is in Deuteronomy 32. One of the things he talks about there in verse 8, Deuteronomy 2 verse 8 says, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the people according to the numbers of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted inheritance. Mm-hmm. So he's just poetically saying, Moses is poetically describing all of the other lands and peoples. They're divided and allotted their own borders and own places in the world. But God has chosen Jacob as his portion. Like, Jacob is God's inheritance that he's taken for himself. Now, then in Revelation we're told that there's this song being sung in heaven of the Lamb that's new, but it's the song of Moses and the Lamb. And now we're being told in Revelation 13 the same idea of, well, everybody who's not part of God's inheritance, who's not his people, they're allotted to the kingdoms of the world. They're allotted to the beast. But God has taken his portion as his people.
This is that bigger picture you were talking about. Yeah.
But it's still, that would also still be immediately applicable to
Sure. Yeah.
Christians of John's era.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. So the point is that God's plan from the foundation of the world, his plan. So Paul talks about in Ephesians 1, which God purposed in Christ before the world was, or in 1 Timothy 1 or 2 Timothy 1, 8 through 10 there, that his eternal purpose that was in his mind from all eternity. So from all eternity, God planned that people would be saved, or the people that he saved would have their names written in the book of life. That's all that he's saying there. So he's not saying that he has a fixed list of people. And if you're on it, you're on it. And if you're not on it, you're not on it. All he's saying is that was God's plan, was that the people that he saved would have their names written in the book of life. That's the point. Does that make sense? Okay. Just,
I mean, how would you, so, it does make, it makes sense, but I'm trying to look at it from a person who's believing the other side of this, right?
uh-huh.
And I think the challenge, that sometimes we get in a defensive mode rather than saying, okay, let's challenge that assumption that
Yeah.
that okay, everybody's written beforehand, there's nothing you can do about it, there's everything else. It can't mean that for two very good reasons. One is more a you're assuming that God's bound by time in any way, shape, or form,
Mhm.
and the other way is you have to deny free will.
Mhm.
And there's ample discussion of free will falling away, all of these other things that you have got to overcome, way more than a particular nuance or a poetic description of, or a macro description of how God operates and transcends time.
Sure.
I just think it's a harder argument to try and defend in my mind. And so when I talk to people about that, I kind of go to that. Why don't you share with me how this can happen, but then you don't have free will. So when somebody falls away, they just weren't. They were written in the book of life, but they really weren't. But they kind of were, but they weren't. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And you do have Isaiah 55, whoever, and then the end of Revelation, whoever wills, it's left open to our choosing.
God has been inclusive from the beginning. That's the reason why the Israelites were there in the beginning, was to glorify, to show God's glory to the nations, that they might be drawn to Him. It's the same thing that we operate on today. That says logically you can't have that operation and have this sort of, the notebook's already been filled out and closed sort of mentality.
Yeah, very good. And also I've always been intrigued by, if someone that apparently was on the list, if they fall away, well, that just means they never believed, or they never were there in the first place. So that just, yeah.
All right.
Gets a little tough. Yeah, gets a little hard there. So, but anyway, just threw that in. So the point is that the sea beast and the devil, okay, the sea beast, the one that came out of the sea, the Roman Empire, and the devil are not in control. They're not in control. And see, one of the things that we have to keep in mind, if we want to put ourselves in the place of Christians who would be suffering under the Roman Empire because of their refusal to worship the emperor or whatever it is the Roman Empire wants them to do that's against the will of God, is that the basis of their salvation, the basis of their being in the Lamb's Book of Life, is trusting the Lamb. When he says, be faithful until death and you will receive a crown of life, they have to believe that. They have to trust that. And that's the basis of their salvation. It's the basis of ours, is trusting him. And they have to know, the message has to be delivered that deity provides salvation. The one who laid the foundation of the world provides salvation. Not the Caesars, not the Roman Empire, nothing that you do in submission to that human authority is going to save you. Okay? It has to be that trust. So some little earthly power that's in existence for a few hundred years was not going to set God's plan aside, was not going to thwart God's plan. I always remember Solomon in Ecclesiastes when he asked the question, who can straighten what God has bent? It's God's plan. There's no power in the universe that's going to change it. And they need to know that. And God's plan is intact. And your name is written in the book of life. No matter what happens, he's going to be there. He's not going to leave you. Okay? Yeah, Chris?
And this is where, so as we start to kind of look at it, these applications, past them, we've got to realize our life is just a slice of time.
Yeah.
And so, and we live in a certain place in a tiny slice. If you were in the past for 50 years or 60 years or 70 years had lived in Russia and were a Christian, the beast was there, man. I mean, it was everybody was going to toe that line, and you were the out person.
Mm-hmm.
Revelation would mean something different to you
Yes.
than it means to us. And even in today, you know, I sometimes I crack up because we see the degradation of definitely of sort of moral foundations and other things. We haven't seen anything yet.
Yeah.
We haven't seen anything yet, but yet we act like, oh, we're so oppressed, right? We're still sitting here worshiping.
Yeah.
We're still sitting here praising God.
Yeah.
If the oppression is somebody's going to roll their eyes because we say we're a Christian, oh my, right? We've got people in China and Russia and other places still that are being killed because of that. That's what these guys were facing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So this helps me both understand what other brothers and sisters in other places are dealing with,
Mm-hmm.
and also makes me grateful and responsible and hopefully a little more bold to do my work as a disciple here too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we have an opportunity to do that.
Right.
We can have an opportunity to do that. Yeah, and so the best that we can do, not having had that experience yet, I'll put in parentheses, is to know this history and know the message that God wanted to get across, so that if we get a turn, to whatever extent, we've got brethren that we can relate to who went through these things, as we do today. You know, there are others that are suffering and staying faithful to God, and we have God who's in control, and we can trust that. No matter what happens, we can trust that. Okay. Yeah. There's a lot we could talk about in that vein. So here's a perspective for us to maintain before we go into, or we almost to the second half of Revelation 13. But the difference between time and eternity is the difference between man's power and God's, between the creator of the world and his plan for saving us and the other powers that would constantly seek to resist God's power. God's kingdom is forever. It will never be destroyed. It is eternal. Okay? And so whatever the nations, however they're in an uproar, as reflected in Psalm 2, and they're, coming out against the Lord and against his Christ and opposing them, he said, remember, the Lord laughs. What are they going to do to him? What are they going to do to his plan? He selected his king. His king is going to reign. His kingdom is going to rule, and it's going to rule forever, no matter what happens. See? And so what a strong message for us to keep in our hearts as we live in this world, and especially if we face anything like real persecution. Okay? These things will be even that much more valuable, and Chris is absolutely right about that. Okay. So verse 9, if anyone has an ear, let him hear. And when you hear that phrase, that is more than listening or more than even understanding. It is hearing with anticipation to obey. Okay, if you hear. Okay. Without hearing in that way and determining to hear in that way, Truth can be right in front of you. It can be swirling all around you, passing right by your eyes, while the ability to see it has been taken away. So when Jesus talked about that idea that to him who has shall more be given and he will have an abundance, but to him who does not have, even what he thinks he has will be taken away. I always think of those Jews in John 9, in the incident with the man born blind. And at the end of that chapter, Jesus has this little discourse with those Jews. And they ask him, well, we're not blind too, are we? You know. And Jesus said, if you were blind, you would have no sin. Okay. But since you say we see, your sin remains. So they were blind, but they didn't think they were blind. I see when I don't see. So their ability, I don't want to get too, dogmatic about things like this, but it seems very, very clear that the truth was right in front of them, but they couldn't see it, and I would contend they didn't want to see it because of what that would entail, right? And so that's the thing that we have to be careful with. Love truth, because it's those who did not receive a love for the truth that in 2 Thessalonians 2 received a diluting influence. They could be diluted because they did not love, insist upon, uphold truth. Yeah, Chris?
First, really, that takes me right back to
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, what happened with Daniel? What happened to a lot of the Jews? They were slain.
Yeah.
What should they have done? They should have patience because God was going to take care of them because they were restored.
Mm-hmm.
Restoration of the remnant took place.
Mm-hmm.
So people who are, you people who are going to face this or are facing this, know that just as he cared for his people and brought back the remnant, you are his remnant. You are his people.
Mm-hmm.
And so have patience and endure.
Yeah. There were things there that they could have put their trust in. Yeah, absolutely. Kevin?
I think with the he who has an ear, let him hear, I think every time that comes up, it's like when you're talking to somebody, like when you're already having a conversation, I know you're supposed to be listening to me, right? But sometimes you're having a conversation and you say, like, in the middle of the conversation, you say, are you listening? Like, are you really listening to me right now? And I feel like every time it comes up, it's something like, I'm about to tell you something that you don't want to hear, or that's like, you really need to listen to this and pay attention to it. And what this made me think of with being taken into captivity and the sword is, this is not what we want to do. We don't want to be taken into captive, and we don't want to die by the sword. And you see that with the Jews of Jesus' time. They were expecting the Messiah
Mm-hmm.
to save them from Rome and bring about the new Jewish kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus is being taken to be arrested, to be crucified, and Peter draws his sword to fight.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus tells him, those who live by the sword are going to die by the sword.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so here in Revelation then, God doesn't tell his people, when you see the beast, fight him in the same way that the beast fights. Fight him with the sword, capture his people, create your own kingdom to fight the beast.
Mm-hmm.
God says, do just what Jesus did. And if that means to be captured, you're captured. If that means you die, you die.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not what I think I see many people in Christianity in the world today doing. We see pressure on religion, and we say, I'm going to fight it. I'm going to fight it in the courts. I'm going to fight it any way I can. I'm going to stockpile my own resources and ammunition because if that is what it comes down to, I'm gonna hole up in my house and defend my religious freedom for whatever it is. And that's not what I see God asking his people to do. He
Right.
says, be ready to be captured, be ready to die. Because that's, and have endurance. Because that's really hard.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so let's encapsulate that here. So Revelation 13:10 refers to the persecution that would come upon these people. The saints must persevere, continue to maintain their faith in the midst of all the suffering Rome is bringing upon them. John says that the perseverance of the saints, okay, so this is the perseverance and faith of the saints, right? That's what he just described. So he says that the perseverance of the saints is to know or understand the authority of the sea beast, that if we keep the commandments of the Lord and are faithful to him, this sea beast will be judged and we will in fact possess the kingdom. If a power like the sea beast is determined to take people into captivity, that power will ultimately dig its own grave. It will cause captivity to come upon itself. Rome will go into captivity of the lake of fire. If it kills with the sword, so it will be. Or, if a Christian is going to go into captivity, selected to be thrown to the lions, burned, etc., then go suffer that consequence of being a Christian. So this is going along, Kevin, with what you were saying. If you must be martyred like Antipas, then do it. And remember, quote, if anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Okay? So exactly what Jesus had said in Matthew 26:52. So do not resist this wicked power with the sword. If you do, by the sword, you'll be killed. Right? Okay. So live within the context of your environment. This is where you are. Live as a Christian. And if there are consequences that come with that, then take those consequences and be faithful until death, if that's what you're called to do. And Jesus promised a crown of life, a Stephanos crown, a crown of victory, okay, to those that overcome. So this is the message. This is, Daniel, looks forward to these things happening, and he's appalled. He's sick. He can't believe what this angel is telling him. And then as we go into John and we look at the reality of what was coming upon them, they needed that perseverance and faith in the midst of these things. Okay. All right. Comments or questions or there's a lot here. Okay.
Right? It's hold firm, be steadfast, bear the burden, right? And that's really what Daniel and his compatriots did, right? They endured the captivity and honored God through the entire thing. They bore the burden that was coming down on them at Babylon. And I think one of the things that Daniel saw in Daniel 7 is, you mean it's going to be this much worse? Right? He's like, I'm dealing with Babylon here, right? And I'm not gonna sway. I'm still gonna pray to God. I'm still gonna, and the other, we're not gonna bow to you. Or if it means going into fire, hey, we're good, right? But then to look at Daniel 7 and say, yeah, this is just the beginning.
Yeah.
Right? You're seeing part one of a 4-part series. And although the culmination is there, everything along the way looks really, really nasty.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't think about that. So, yeah, he's already in Babylon, and then he's saying, yeah, look what's going to happen. Wow.
Yeah, you got it good.
What?
Yeah, wow, yeah, right, that's a great perspective. Great perspective, absolutely. All right, we have 4 minutes, and we're going into the second part of Revelation 13. So we'll introduce, like really, and then we'll be done. Okay, to kind of introduce where we're going, and we're not gonna really teach. You see how I'm using up the time right now? See, it's pretty slick, you know. So, all right, let's just look at verse 11, because really the section is about down through 18 here that we'll be dealing with. But then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. He had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. So we're going to identify what does he mean by the land. So we have a sea beast, and now we have a land or an earth beast. And what I'm going to be attempting to present is that that land is the land of Palestine, and that this beast is going to come from among the Jews. Okay? So that's where we're going to be going with this as we get into the second part of Revelation, and it will be quite interesting. So that's where we'll be going. So with that, even though we have 3 minutes, we're going to call it. Let's call it right there, and we have a good break point. So, all right. Hey, guys, thank you for that great discussion, and I'm learning along with you, and I appreciate it. And so, class,